The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're going to give people about another minute to log on and then we'll get started. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Megan Brissette, and I'm the Event Marketing Manager here at Curinos. Today's webinar is 1071 for Small Business Lending. Are you ready? And our host is Lindsay Burkhalter, Director of Small Business Solutions here at Curinos. If you have questions during the presentation, we'd love for you to type them into the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel. This webinar is being recorded and we will send the recording via email post-webinar. Okay, Lindsay, let's begin.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Happy Wednesday. Hopefully everyone's having a great day. So thankful you guys have decided to join me on your Wednesday afternoon to talk about 1071. No other exciting topic, right? So let's dig right in here. So as Megan mentioned, my name is Lindsay Burkhalter. I am the Director of Small Business Solutions here at Curinos. I've been with the organization almost 2 years. I am a former banking practitioner, so I've definitely sat in your chair in a number of different facets as it relates to product management, small business operations, credit underwriting. So it's really great to come to this side of things and apply that experience. Last thing to note, I'm an avid Buffalo Bills fan. I always have to call that out. So hopefully we have some Mafia on the call today. So what are we going to chat about today? So first, we're just going to talk a little bit about Curinos. I'm sure that most folks that have attended Curinos webinars before, or maybe a CBA webinar in which we were a guest, is familiar with us by now, but we'll talk a little bit about who we are. And then we will talk about the 1071 legislation at a high level, just kind of understanding the different metrics and details surrounding identifying who and who isn't impacted. And then we're going to talk and spend most of our time on number 3, which is really a proactive approach to the 1071 legislation. So what can your organizations do now to identify potential impacts once 1071 is implemented in order to mitigate those things today and make some changes prior to the legislation actually going into effect. And then we'll talk about next steps. If you have any questions, please write them in the chat. I'll try to pick them up as we go. If not, we can leave time for questions at the end. Okay, so who is Curinos, right? So Curinos is a combination of 2 familiar names in the financial services industry, Novantas on the deposit side and the advisory side, and Informa on the lending side. So the company became Curinos, the 2 merged into one back in the summer of 2021. And we have been operating under the Curinos name ever since. And when you think about our offerings, it's really cross-balance sheet. And we're really one of the only financial services providers today that use data to drive our decision making, right? So it's not just us coming to you and saying, here's what we think you should do. It's here's what we think you should do and why. So that goes across data, comparative analytics, and optimization platforms using our data as a baseline. And this is just, it's a busy slide, but just kind of talks about some of our relationships. We do a lot of work with Wall Street Journal, American Banker. We'll be at the American Banking Small Biz Conference in November, so hopefully we'll see all of you there. We've been in the industry a long time. We have a lot of clients, and we love working with you. So let's start off with a poll question. So Megan is going to launch, and this just helps us better gauge the audience as to how you're currently handling 1071 within your organization. So the question is, for everyone on the line, how is your financial institution assigned ownership of 1071 within the organization? So A, the initiative is owned by compliance and risk with input from the line of business. B, the initiative is owned by the line of business with input from compliance and risk. C, the ownership is shared between both of those areas, compliance, risk, and the line of business. And D, maybe it's something else. So we'll give it a minute here. Looking forward to your responses. If I could hum, I would do some Jeopardy music, but I'll spare you that. So Megan, let us know how we're doing here.
Yeah, close it, Lindsay, and there are the responses.
Okay. Okay, so 31% say the initiative is owned by compliance and risk with input from the line of business. 46% say it's owned by the line of business with input from compliance and risk. 23% is shared ownership, and no one answered other. So this is just interesting, right? Just to kind of understand from an institution to an institution perspective, this is just such a large initiative. It's good to understand kind of how you guys are structured to approach it. So that's good background as we dive in here. Okay, so let's talk about what 1071 is. And for those of you on the call that aren't familiar with that, I hope there aren't many, but we'll go through this at a high level. So on March of this year, right when all of the deposits fund was going on, what I often refer to as March Madness, the CFPB said, this is a great time. Let's issue the final rule for Dodd-Frank as it relates to small business lending. So what this means is that lending institutions are going to be required to aggregate and submit select data points on small business credit apps to the CFPB on an ongoing basis. So very similar to HMDA, right? Just for our small business friends. Applying this is supposed to be obviously provide greater transparency as it relates to fair lending practices and identify any areas of concern. So is a lender identifying or lending more or less to women-owned businesses, to minority-owned businesses, et cetera? And we've never had this level of exposure before, right? So it's going to be, I think, extremely telling as to how lending practices are impacting our population. As a result of that, the logistics and the impacts of the rule, and more importantly, the outcomes that it will present are significant for you guys, right? So this is not a webinar about here's how to collect data and submit it using nCino or maybe a third party to the CFPB. This is not about the data collection piece. This is about what can I do now to understand what my lending practices show, right? And if there is an area of risk or opportunity, what do we need to do to change some things or balance that out prior to the rules coming into effect? So let's talk a little bit about the scope, the data, and the timing of the rule. So number one is essentially the first step. So to determine if you need to comply with 1071, there are 4 key areas that require consideration. And if the criteria for all of these are met, then 1071 will apply to you. So small business definition has been set at less than or equal to 5 million in gross annual revenue in the previous fiscal year. Your FI is a covered institution, which means that you originate more than 100 small business, what they refer to as covered credit transactions in the last couple of years. Your FI is producing covered credit transactions on loans, lines of credit, credit cards, merchant cash advances, agricultural credit products, etc. And your FI is generating covered applications, which means an oral or a written request for covered credit. I was actually on a call with a client the other day, and it was brought up that we don't really know how our small business applications are taken, right? It could be verbally. We don't really have a lot of visibility there. Kind of scary, right? Like that's something you definitely need to get a handle on as it relates to this rule, and the sooner the better. So number two, if it's determined that 1071 applies, financial institutions will be required to collect and report the data in three different categories. So financial institution, credit, and demographics. So on the financial institution component, you're going to need a unique identifier, app date, method taken, etc. On the credit side, you're going to need all that fun stuff: loan type, purpose, loan amount, census tract, gross annual revenue, NAICS code, all of those kind of business attributes. And then the third piece is demographics. You're going to need to reflect if it's minority owned, LGBTQI, women owned, all of those different demographics that the CFPB is requesting. Now, again, the webinar today is not to cover those details, so this is just meant to be a high-level summary. Oops, excuse me. So just please refer to the CFPB documentation if you have specific questions on the data collection. And then number three is the number of covered transactions that you originate over a time period will indicate when you're going to comply. So the majority of folks really do fall into that October 1st, 2024 bucket, where if you're originating greater than or equal to 2,500 covered transactions in the last couple of years, you're going to need to start compliance in October 1st of 24. And then it goes down subsequently from there based on the number of credit transactions that are applicable to you. Now, you'll see the footnote there, number 2. This does not include those banks chartered in New York State. So my M&T friends that might be on the line, you're already complying for a lot of this as it relates to the rule that the New York Department of Financial Services put out. So you're a bit ahead of the game. This also does not take into account the Texas stay that the Southern District announced back in the end of July that basically said, wait, we've got some questions, we're going to halt the implementation of this rule. So good news is that you will likely have probably 5 to 7 months longer than what's outlined here in number 3 in order to comply with the rule. That doesn't necessarily mean you don't have to worry about it, right? The sooner that you start worrying and thinking about it, the absolute better off you're going to be. So, as I mentioned, today's webinar focus is if you're ready from a proactive analytics standpoint. So, one of the things that we've done as an organization is outline a success in small business story for our clients. So we've got 5 key imperatives that we've highlighted that will drive small business success across the balance sheet, right? Whether it's deposits, lending, as it relates to really focusing in on that segment. One of those key imperatives contains this proactive 1071 analysis and outreach. In other words, it is a must, right? So you'll see on the screen here, the imperative I'm referring to is to accelerate fair and responsible lending practices in accordance with pending 1071 legislation to attract and retain target segments and achieve primacy while managing risk. And the value driver here, no surprise, is growth and risk mitigation. So in other words, this is an essential, right? This is not it's a nice to do. It's, hey, let's get ahead of the game. Let's do this now. Let's make our changes that we need to make now so that when October 1st of 24 rolls around, or even if it's 6 months after that, we're ready. So financial institutions must prioritize the 1071 analysis and specifically focus on outcomes, including what will this mean for your practice and your policy overall as it relates to small business lending? Do you have a good handle on originations in areas with large minority populations? How do critical originations metrics compare in minority concentrated zip codes for you versus the rest of the market? Does a high proportion of your lending activity come from women-owned businesses? You guys even know that. Whatever the demographic density by region, is your institution overall practicing fair and equitable lending? And I can't reinforce this last statement on the slide enough. To obtain the complete picture, you need a comparison of lender versus market and peer data. And that's where we come in. Okay, before we dig into the details there, let's roll into another poll question. So poll question number 2, how is your FI working proactively to identify impacts resulting from 1071? A, we're not. We're focusing on the data collection and system setup currently. B, we've discussed it, but don't currently have the data, tools, or resources needed to properly assess this. C, we've got a great handle on it. We are A-OK, and we're already working on updates to policy and procedure as a result. Or D, you're not sure. Give it one more minute here. Okay. So 17% of you said we're not focusing on this. We're focusing on data currently. 50% said we've discussed it and we don't have the data, tools, or resources needed to properly assess, which is what I would have anticipated, that the majority of folks have said, you know what, we have to get a great handle on this, but we can't right now given everything else we're focusing on, right? We've got a great handle on it. It sounds like some people do as well. Looks like that was 17%. And then 17% are not sure. So that's good information for participants to have. Okay. So let's talk about how you can be proactive, right? So Curinos is in a unique position because we have the tools and the expertise needed to help you identify 1071 impacts prior to the rule being implemented so that you can make required changes now, right? A lot of you on the phone today are already participants in our Lenders Benchmark Analyzer for small business lending, but a lot of you are not, right? So once you become a participant in our benchmarking tool for originations, this is an anonymized consortium. We can take your data, we can overlay demographic information as it relates to zip codes, MSA, CBSA, et cetera. And then we can also overlay the demographic information as it relates to minority-owned businesses, whether it's Black, Hispanic, Asian, women-owned. And we can analyze this in a number of different ways, slice and dice, to show you, okay, here's where you're performing, here's where the rest of the market's performing, here's where you should be focusing right now. And then the other thing here, we'll just go on a little aside, is one of the perks about it, joining our LBA is that not only will this enable us to help you with 1071 impacts, but you're also going to get regular, routine, weekly updates on market data and trends to help manage the small business piece overall, right? So not just from a compliance perspective, but also from a, hey, how's my market share in New York this week as it relates to my unsecured product? Or, I just dropped a marketing campaign in the Florida market and I want to see how successful it's been. All of that is possible when you join our consortium. So the 1071 piece is really just kind of like the gravy on top of the potatoes, right? So just a quick aside about the consortium, and we'll get back to 1071, but I think it's important for you to understand current participants and who we're onboarding and, what kind of market coverage we have. So we launched this tool in April of last year. So in a little over a year, we've got 13 participants that you see here. We have your big banks, we've got your B of A, your Chase, your Wells. We also have your more middle-sized banks, Huntington, PNC, still very large banks, mind you. And then we're also onboarding Citizens, First Horizon, and Key. And we have many other folks we're having conversations with in the pipeline. So our coverage today equates to essentially 36% of the total market. This is a tremendous percentage given we just launched last year. And on average, the benchmarking percentage coverage that we target is 30. So we're already over that. So just wanted to give the group the context there as it relates to who's participating, what kind of coverage are we talking about here, who are, if you're First Horizon is an example, and one of your key competitors is Wells in the Florida space or the Tennessee space, you kind of can see, oh, well, they're already in the consortium. That would be really helpful. And so this just goes to allude to what I was saying before. Aside from 1071, which we're going to get back to in a second, if you join our consortium, you can get exposure on pricing and margin, risk management as it relates to credit policy, market opportunity, overall production views, right? How are my applications versus my approvals versus my bookings? Helps you identify the white space, right? Where are there holes in your lending area practice that you could essentially focus on to fill? And then also operations, right? Insight into cycle times, pull-through rates, app to approval, approval to book. All of that is available within the consortium, which you'll see in a minute will help with 1071. So let's revert back to 1071. So what are all of the different data points that are available for analysis should you decide to participate in our consortium? And we are able to then complete the analysis based on your data versus those in the market, your peers. So as I mentioned earlier, there's a number of ways we would slice and dice your data to see how you're performing. So the first area is product, right? We can slice and dice by secured or unsecured, loan or line of credit, as well as SBA products. Now, a question will probably come in, what about credit card? Credit card is obviously a big part of this, and it's on the docket for us to add going into 2024, but not currently available. So just want to clarify that we would really focus on your loan and line of credit products, as well as your SBA products as it applies. So then we'll look at credit parameters, right? So loan and line of credit, loan term, LTV, collateral type, personal score. A note on the score, everyone scores their small business clients differently, right? You might use personal score in combination with business score. Maybe your organization uses a custom score. Either way, it's a bit difficult to kind of streamline that risk parameter as it relates to small business, and we're continuing to work on that. But for now, for those that do use personal credit score as an attribute, we do have comparative metrics for that. So that would be another lens that we would analyze 1071 from, and you'll see an example of that later. Production, applications, approvals, bookings, market share, branch share, both units and dollars. All of this will be incorporated into the analysis. And then let's talk pricing, right? That's a huge one. Total interest rate, comparing your rate trends to peers in certain minority concentrated markets, but also margin, right? We have the ability to say, okay, well, Bank X is, their average margin is 300 basis points on this product, but compared to the rest of the market, it's 100 basis points. So is there a concern there, right? Operations, are you pulling through applications faster or slower in certain minority focused populations, right? We will be able to tell you that. On the business side, annual sales, NAICS code, structure, we covered in the beginning that this is anything 5 million and under. So we have the ability to filter on that, look at different annual sales buckets, look at different NAICS codes, different industries, look at different business structures, and tell you where you might have a concern. From a distribution perspective, we can look at state, CBSA, we can look at MSA, although I know that that's not on here. I know some folks use MSA as opposed to CBSA. Branch zip, business zip, channel, right? Is it coming in digitally? If you have that capability, is it coming in through the branch or your centralized call center? These are all the distribution metrics that would be available. And then time frame. Obviously to comply with 1071, we have to make sure we're looking at the appropriate time frame. So last 2 years, rolling 12, full year, year to date, quarterly, monthly, there are a number of different options that we can slice and dice the data as it relates to time frame to get the most accurate picture of what's happening with your lending practice. So let's talk about another poll question, and this will be the last one for today. What data points do you feel are most critical for your financial institution to analyze in order to best assess potential 1071 impacts? So based on the list we just went through, what do you think is most critical? A, is it credit parameters? B, production, C, pricing, D, distribution, or E, all? Let's give it a second. Okay, great. All right, poll closed. 64% of you think it's all of the above. So I think that makes a lot of sense. We did have a larger population that talked about production. So 21% of you felt that production was the most important. Other minimal responses in pricing and distribution, no one thought credit parameters. I mean, I would agree with the majority, right? It's so important that you have a handle on all of this, right? So E, all of the above. And as you saw on the previous slide, we're well suited to help you analyze all of that. So now let's get into some actual examples. So we've already conducted some pre-analysis with a lot of clients and even non-clients as it relates to 1071 impacts. So what I'm about to show you is a few slides in different areas, whether it's production, credit, operations, pricing, where we have seen some concerns. This is all anonymized, fictitious data, so not actually representative of any one real bank, but just meant to illustrate for you what kind of things we can or will find as a result of partnering with you on this. So in this example, we're specifically focusing on market share and branch share across zip codes that we've identified that have a larger Hispanic or Latino population. So on the left-hand side, we have market volume opportunity, and on the right-hand side, we have market share and branch share. And we're going to specifically focus on the blue boxes for both of those. So if you look at the commentary to the left, what this tells us is that the booked dollar market opportunity for greater than 50% Hispanic and Latino population for this client is $143 million, essentially. And the bulk of that is coming from the 90 plus and the 80 to 90 plus concentrated Hispanic populations. In total, this client in this area has a branch share of 17%, meaning the presence is there, but the market share is not, right? The market share is at only 9%. So initially that's a concern right off the bat. But if we look more deeply, this lender has 21% branch share in the 90 plus Hispanic Latino population, but only 16% share, right? So they've got a $45 million opportunity there where their branch share and their market share is not necessarily aligning. But we're also seeing it in the 80 to 90% Hispanic bucket where the lender has 18% branch share, but only 15% market share. So they've got another $44 million opportunity here, right? So this is just a high-level example of looking at market share, branch share, what kind of trends we have been seeing. Now let's talk pull-through operational metrics, right? So another aha, I call these ahas, or another colleague of mine says, is there a there, right? And there definitely is right here. So when we look at application to approval rate on the left-hand side or the application to book rate on the right-hand side, we see that there's a concern for this sample client, right? For the Hispanic population on the left-hand side, the black line is the peer line, the blue line is the lender line, and we're basically seeing that this lender is overall approving much less as it relates to applications in this Hispanic population versus the rest of the market. So once we have this initial insight, that's where we would dig in. And we would say, okay, what products, what loan amounts, what credit scores? Is this really valid or is it a concern? So this is just that initial view that then would take us down through the next steps into the more detailed view. And then on the right-hand side, application to booked, how many are actually fully pulling through? Similar story, right? So pull through is better than peers for the greater than 80% population here, which is great. But we've got less than 80%. But then when we get into the higher concentration of Hispanic Latino population, you'll see that those kind of cross over, right? And you'll see that the lender starts to plummet versus that of the market. So that would be another area that we would focus to do some more analytics to determine what is driving that. Okay, now let's talk pricing. So similar concept as pull through or approval rates, but basically what is our overall price on a product versus that of our peers in a minority concentrated market. And so this is just a high level finding that we had. Again, it's fictitious, but very similar to some of the other analysis that we've done, is that in this case, on average, and this was for the Black population, but when you got to 60% plus in terms of minority concentration, the rate for the lender is like 7% on average, and the rate for the peer is like 4.5. That's a substantial difference, right? So that's definitely something that the CFPB might look at and say, well, geez, what is the deal with that? And that's something we can help you figure out now. And then the last example that I have for you guys is personal score. So I know on our last poll question, a lot of folks didn't feel that this was super relevant, but I think it definitely is, right? So depending again on how you assess credit for small business applicants, personal credit score view can let us know how we're booking small business loans and lines of credit across the spectrum relative to peers. So in this example, on the top, you've got lender, and on the bottom, you've got peer. And for the lender, you'll see that for this product, the average score for this minority population in the 70 plus segment is 800 plus, right? With the score distribution of 780 to 850. It's pretty high, right? Not that that's right, wrong, or indifferent, just is what it is. But then when you look at peer, and you look at that same population percentage, 70 to 80, 80 to 90, what's circled in the red here, the average score is 780, and the score distribution is wider, right? 720 to 840. So the overall finding here is that the lender booked average personal credit score on this product is 30 bps higher versus peers in those higher concentrated populations, and it's also a narrower distribution, right? So something that the CFPB will likely look at. So those are all examples of the kinds of things that we can help your organization do as it relates to 1071 analysis on a proactive basis. So if we decided to partner with you on this effort, what would the time frame look like? What steps would we need to take in order to get you to where you need to be? So step one would be to join Lenders Benchmark, as I alluded to earlier, right? So on average, I've got a time frame here for each of these steps. On average, we look at 90 days from signing of a contract to get you guys in, audit your data, validate your data, and then get you launched, right? If you're already a Lenders Benchmark participant, you're a step ahead, right? Because we already have your data and we can actually start doing the analysis now. But for those that aren't, that would be your first step, as we would talk to you about joining our consortium. So then what? So then our team would partner with your team to do a data deep dive and comparative peer analysis. And the timing for that is approximately 6 to 8 weeks, but it's basically exactly what it says. We would assess your offerings, your history, your data, your systems. We would identify peers, we would identify metrics of focus, and as I alluded to in our examples, we would do deep dives overlaying our data with demographic data, with census, zip code data, and evaluate where you have areas of concern. Conversely, though, you might have areas of opportunity. You might find something, and we might find something that's like, hey, look at this. This is something you want the CFPB to know. So we identify both of those things. And then we synthesize our findings, we come to you, we report out what we see, and we would also prepare reporting detailing our lending performance across all the different metrics of focus that we're talking about. And so again, that is about 6 to 8 weeks. So then let's talk about step 3, roadmap and strategic plan. So this is where this would take 10 to 12 weeks on average, and there is an opportunity for step 2 and step 3 to be done concurrently at some point. So just kind of keep that in mind as we talk about this as well. But step 3 is essentially developing a strategic roadmap across the key metrics of focus, risks, opportunities that we identified in the previous stage. And we would basically help you say, okay, here's what we think you could do to help kind of mitigate what we found. We would identify target products, process, capabilities. We would identify KPIs that we would track progress. And then we would also help with a strategic roadmap that would outline potential action paths to address the areas of opportunity. And then step 4, ongoing retainer support. So progress updates on key areas that we identified in phase 3, identifying new trending risks and opportunities. So in other words, it wouldn't just be a one-time thing. It would be, we would have an ongoing relationship with you to, because we're constantly getting your data, right? We're getting it once a week to do a constant kind of revolving view of, you know, what you're seeing. You know, maybe you made some changes after step 3 and we want to make sure we're seeing that come to fruition in step 4. We would help you with that. We would have strategy check-ins with key stakeholders. And on the deliverable side of things, we would provide progress reporting, roadmap modifications, and also custom reporting and updates to gauge your progress as it makes sense. So there's a lot there. But it's an extremely comprehensive plan and will enable you to fully get a grasp on what's happening with 1071 in your organization. So that brings us to the end of the presentation. I've included my email address here, and I've also included my Bill's logo because I have to. Please reach out to me. I'd love to talk more with you or folks in your organization about how we can partner to help you with proactive 1071 outreach. So with that being said, let's pause and see if we have any questions that have come in through the chat. Give it a minute. If you have a question, please enter it in. I'd love to hear from you. Okay, we have our first question. How is the Texas stay impacting your recommendation for action? Okay, so kind of going back to our previous slide where we talked about the time frame, and we said for most it's October 1st, but essentially we're not, you know, we're seeing that kind of get delayed 5 to 7 months. You still need to take action now, right? We know how it is working in a bank. There's multiple priorities, shared resources. You know, you're kind of all competing to try to get to a goal. You know, the sooner that you get ahead of this, the better. So in my mind, that was a gift, a 5 to 7 month gift, I would say, but does not prevent you from starting to take action right now. Oh, okay, we have one more question. How can we pull this on our own without Curinos' help? So let me level set on the answer to that. I'm not sure that you can, and the reason is you have the ability to pull publicly available information as it relates to census, zip code, kind of all of that across the board. You may also have the ability to pull in women-owned metrics, right? If you have a partnership with D&B or something like that, that they can provide you with that information. But what you don't have is the market piece, right? So you can do an individual assessment of your bank or your FI and understand how you're performing. But without that mirror against the rest of the market, I'm not really sure how you can gauge if it's good, bad, or indifferent, right? Especially since the CFPB really hasn't put forth specific parameters that they're looking for. So we come in, and it goes back to my other slide here, where we say you have to have a comparative. I'm just going to pull that up. To obtain the complete picture, a comparison of lender versus market and peer data is essential. So hopefully that answers the question. Any other questions, comments, or thoughts I can answer today? Everyone's quiet. Okay, Well, don't hesitate to reach out to me after. I've got my contact information up here on the screen. Would love to hear from you and talk about how we can help you with 1071. So you guys have about 20 minutes left. Thank you so much for your time and hope to be talking to you soon. Enjoy the rest of the day.